If you could time travel back to the evening of June 24th, 1717, and step into the Goose and Gridiron Alehouse in St. Paul's Churchyard, London, you might expect to find a scene straight out of a Dan Brown novel. You might anticipate hooded figures chanting in Latin, knights in chainmail plotting the overthrow of the Hanoverian monarchy, or alchemists huddled over alembics, attempting to transmute lead into gold. You would be looking for the Illuminati, the puppet masters, the architects of the New World Order. You would be disappointed. Instead, you would find a dinner party. You would find a room full of dusty, slightly intoxicated Londoners, stonemasons, apple merchants, and a few minor civil servants, eating roast goose and drinking copious amounts of ale. According to the historical record, specifically Dr. James Anderson's Constitutions of 1723 and the surviving minutes of the Grand Lodge, 4 local London lodges gathered that night for what they termed a grand feast. Their agenda was not world domination, it was fellowship. Their objective was not to map the streets of Washington, D.C. into satanic pentagrams, but simply to cement and uphold the good and fellow feeling among the brothers. On this banal evening, amidst the clatter of pewter tankards and the smell of roasted fowl, these men elected a gentleman named Anthony Sayer, a man described by later historians as of no great distinction, as their first Grand Master. They formalized a set of rules for their dining club, and in doing so, they inadvertently founded the modern world's most famous, most feared, and most misunderstood secret society. This gap, the chasm between the roast goose reality of 1717 and the all-seeing eye mythology of popular culture, is where we begin. We have been told that Freemasonry descends from the Knights Templar, fleeing persecution in the 14th century. We have been told they possess the secret wisdom of Solomon's Temple. We have been told they control the banking system, the media, and the government. But as we will see, the truth is far stranger and far more significant than the fiction. The Freemasons didn't invent a secret magic. They invented the private society, the very concept of a space where men could meet as equals, regardless of their politics or religion, to build something greater than themselves. Welcome to Distilled. Today we are distilling the craft, How the Freemasons Made the Modern World by Professor John Dickie. John Dickie is not a Freemason. He is a historian at University College London, best known for his definitive blood-soaked history of the Sicilian Mafia, Cosa Nostra. This makes him the perfect guide for our journey into the lodge. He is an expert in secret brotherhoods, but he is not bound by their oaths. He brings a frosty and undeceived detachment to the subject, stripping away the romantic myths to reveal the mechanical gears of the organization. His thesis is provocative and untraditional. Dickie argues that Freemasonry is not a relic of the medieval past, but a machine of modernity. He posits that the Freemasons essentially invented the social operating system for the British Empire, the United States, and the global spread of Enlightenment values. They created the first social network, a platform that allowed a merchant in Boston to trust a banker in Calcutta, simply because they shared a handshake. But at Distilled, we do not take the author's word as gospel. We pivot to the hard science. We are going to take the claims made in the craft and stress test them against academic literature. The economics of trust. Does who you know actually translate to the bottom line? We will examine a fascinating econometric study by Fabio Braggion from Tilburg University titled Managers, Firms, and Secret Social Networks. Braggion analyzed 410 Victorian companies to see if having a Freemason manager actually increased profits, or if it just increased corruption and cronyism. The results are statistically significant and surprisingly nuanced. The psychology of ritual. Why do grown men, bankers, judges, presidents, wear aprons, roll up their trousers, and perform elaborate plays in the dark? We will look at psychological literature on precaution theory and anxiety regulation from the Journal of Applied Sports Psychology and Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Processes to understand the cognitive benefits of ritualistic behavior. We will ask if these rituals are merely silly, or if they are actually sophisticated cognitive hacks that regulate stress and bond groups together. The historical forensics. We will conduct a forensic timeline analysis of the American frontier to see exactly how Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, may have borrowed the Masonic ritual to create the Latter-day Saint Temple Endowment, and how the Sicilian Mafia may have pirated the same code to build a criminal empire. From stone to speculation. John Dickie's The Craft begins by ruthlessly dismantling the Templar myth. For centuries, Masons and non-Masons alike have perpetuated the romantic notion that when the Knights Templar were crushed by King Philip IV of France in 1307, the survivors fled to Scotland, went underground, and re-emerged as the Freemasons. Dickie argues there is absolutely no historical evidence for this. It is a fable invented in the 18th century to give the fraternity a noble pedigree. The actual lineage is more practical, yet equally fascinating. It begins not with knights, but with builders. The operative roots, the Free in Freemason. The story begins with the operative Masons of the Middle Ages, the literal stonemasons who built the great cathedrals of Europe from Chartres to York Minster. These men were unique among the laboring classes of the medieval world. A typical serf was bound to the land. A typical weaver or baker was bound to a local guild in a specific town, but a master mason had to travel. The nature of cathedral building meant that when one massive project was finished, the workforce had to migrate to the next site, often crossing borders and language barriers. They were, by definition, Freemasons. Historian Jasper Ridley notes that the etymology likely comes from freestone mason, a highly skilled worker who carved freestone, the soft, fine-grained limestone used for intricate tracery and statuary, as opposed to the rough masons who merely laid the block walls. Because they traveled, they faced a unique problem: credentials. In 1350, there were no union cards, no LinkedIn profiles, and no central database of certifications. If a mason arrived at a building site in Cologne claiming to be a master, how could the local master builder verify his skill level? He couldn't just try him out on a valuable piece of stone that might take months to carve. The solution was the grip and the word. The Masons developed a system of secret handshakes and passwords that were revealed only as a man progressed through the grades of apprentice, fellowcraft, and master. These secrets were not mystical. They were essentially a trade union's PIN code. They protected the labor market. If you knew the grip, you got the higher wage. The lodge was simply the lean-to shack on the building site, where the Masons stored their tools, ate their lunch, and rested. It was a functional, dusty, working-class space. The Great Transformation, 1600 to 1717. As the great age of cathedral building wound down in the 16th and 17th centuries, these lodges began to face a crisis of relevance. To survive, they began to admit non-stonemasons, gentlemen, merchants, scholars, and aristocrats who were attracted to the geometry, the history, and the camaraderie of the Masons. These were the speculative Masons. They didn't cut stone. They speculated on moral geometry. They didn't build cathedrals, they built character. Dickie highlights the crucial, often overlooked role of Dr. John Theophilus Desaguliers in this transformation. Desaguliers was a Huguenot refugee, a scientist, a Fellow of the Royal Society, and the experimental assistant to Isaac Newton. He became Grand Master in 1719, shortly after the Goose and Gridiron meeting. Desaguliers saw in Freemasonry a vehicle for something profound. Europe had spent the last century tearing itself apart in religious wars. Protestant against Catholic, Roundhead against Cavalier. The Royal Society had established a new way of looking at the physical world, through observation, reason, and lack of dogma. Desaguliers wanted to apply this to the social world. He helped craft a new vision for the lodge, codified in James Anderson's Constitutions of 1723. This document contained a radical, almost treasonous idea. The lodge would be a neutral ground. Inside the lodge, men would leave their religious and political arguments at the door. They would not be Tories or Whigs, Catholics or Anglicans. They would simply be brothers, bound by a belief in a supreme being, the great architect, and a love of virtue. This was the platform Freemasonry offered. a space for the exchange of ideas and business that was insulated from the toxic partisanship of the outside world. It was, as Nate Shivar describes in his review of Dickie's work, a vague system of belief that really anyone could buy into, allowing for truly universal access. The network of empire. One of Dickie's strongest arguments is that Freemasonry became the operating system of the British Empire. As Britain expanded its reach across the globe, the lodge went with it, serving as a vital mechanism for cohesion in a sprawling, chaotic imperial project. The British Army played a central role in this dissemination. Military lodges were mobile units. Regiments carried their warrant, the charter authorizing them to meet, in a saddlebag or a chest. Wherever the regiment camped, whether in the sweltering heat of Bengal, the rocky terrain of Quebec, or the penal colonies of Australia, they would set up a lodge. This served two critical functions: bonding the officer corps. The British military was a patchwork of men from different backgrounds: Scottish Presbyterians, Irish Protestants, English Anglicans. The lodge provided a ritualized space where these differences were suspended, fostering a deep esprit de corps. Imperial integration. Perhaps more importantly, the lodge became a mechanism for assimilating local elites. Dickie describes how in India, the lodge became one of the few places where British colonial rulers and Indian elites, Parsi, Sikhs, Muslims, and eventually Hindus, could meet on relatively equal terms. A Parsi merchant in Bombay could be initiated into a lodge, learn the same rituals as a British colonel, and sit at the same dinner table. This didn't erase the racism or hierarchy of the empire, but it greased the wheels of commerce and administration. It created a loyalty network that helped bind the disparate parts of the empire to the metropole. The two faces of revolution. Dickie illustrates how this neutral platform became a weapon that could be wielded for both order and chaos, depending on the context. The secrecy and brotherhood that sustained the British Empire also fueled the revolutions that sought to dismantle the old world. The American Order. In America, Freemasonry became what Dickie calls a civic religion. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock, and many other founding fathers were active, enthusiastic Masons. Washington famously laid the cornerstone of the U.S. Capitol building in 1793, dressed in full Masonic regalia: apron, sash, and trowel. For Washington, the lodge was a model for the Republic itself. It was a place where men voted for their leaders, the worshipful master, followed a constitution, and advanced based on merit, learning the ritual rather than birthright. The Masonic values of liberty, equality, and fraternity were baked into the DNA of the United States. Here, the craft was a stabilizing force, a pillar of the new establishment. The European chaos. In continental Europe, however, the story was different. The Catholic Church, seeing a rival power structure that ignored papal authority and claimed to offer a path to virtue outside the Church, condemned Freemasonry. Pope Clement XII issued the Bull in Eminenti in 1738, forbidding Catholics from joining under pain of excommunication. This drove Masons underground in Catholic countries like France, Italy, and Spain. Forced into the shadows, the lodges transformed from dining clubs into hotbeds of radicalism. If you were a freethinker, a Republican, or a revolutionary, the lodge was the only place you could meet safely. Dickie recounts the story of John Custos, a Swiss diamond cutter and Mason living in Lisbon, who was arrested by the Portuguese Inquisition in 1743. He was tortured relentlessly, racked 9 times in a single session, because the inquisitors believed the Masonic secrets must be heretical. Custos eventually revealed the secrets, the handshakes and the story of Hiram Abiff, which baffled the inquisitors, who expected something far more satanic. This persecution radicalized the craft in Europe. The Carbonari in Italy and various Republican groups in France used the cellular structure of the Masonic Lodge to organize the overthrow of monarchs. The neutral platform had become a revolutionary cell. The modern decline. If Freemasonry was so powerful, building empires, founding nations, toppling kings, why does it feel so irrelevant today? Why is the average age of a Mason in the UK over 60? Why are lodges closing and selling off their buildings? Dickie points to a fatal flaw: inflexibility in the face of social change. The organization that was radical in 1717 because it admitted men of different religions became reactionary in the 20th century because it refused to adapt to two massive shifts: the rise of women and the struggle for racial equality. The exclusion of women. By locking out 50% of the population, Freemasonry alienated itself from the modern family structure. As the separate spheres of Victorian life, men at the club, women at home, collapsed in the post-war era, a men-only dining club with secrets looked increasingly archaic and suspicious. It went from being a gentleman's requirement to a husband's escapism. Racism and segregation. In America, a parallel structure developed, Prince Hall Masonry, for black men, because white lodges refused to initiate them. This segregation persisted long after the Civil Rights Movement, staining the fraternity's reputation for universal brotherhood. While mainstream Masonry has largely, though not entirely, corrected this today, the decades of exclusion during the 20th century severed the organization from the most vibrant social movements of the time. The book concludes with a sobering thought. Freemasonry made the modern world, but the modern world has largely outgrown it. We have LinkedIn for networking, Reddit for discussion, and the Rotary Club for charity. The unique selling point of the Lodge, a private network of trust, has been diluted by technology and transparency. Here is where we leave the narrative of the book and enter the laboratory of Distilled. John Dickie tells us that Freemasonry was a powerful network. But as researchers, we ask, what is the measurable value of that network? Can we quantify the Brotherhood Premium? The economics of the secret handshake. To answer this, we turn to a remarkable piece of economic history research: Managers, Firms, and Secret Social Networks. The Economics of Freemasonry, by Fabio Braggion, a professor of finance at Tilburg University. Braggion didn't just look at anecdotes, he looked at the balance sheets. He constructed a massive dataset of 410 companies listed on the London Stock Exchange between 1895 and 1902. This was the height of the Victorian Masonic era, a time when Oscar Wilde, Winston Churchill, and the Prince of Wales were all members. Braggion painstakingly cross-referenced the names of the managers and directors of these 410 companies with the membership rolls of the United Grand Lodge of England, which were only recently opened to researchers. He wanted to answer a simple question: did having a Freemason boss make a company more successful? The answer is a nuanced yes, but, and it tells us everything about how social capital works. The trust benefit: small firms. For small, private, or newly listed companies, having a Freemason manager was a significant competitive advantage. Braggion found that these Masonic firms had significantly higher leverage, access to debt, than their non-Masonic counterparts. Specifically, they were about 5% to 6% more leveraged. Why does this matter? In 1900, there were no credit scores, no computerized audits, and regulatory oversight was thin. Lending money to a small business was a high-risk gamble. The banker had to trust the borrower's character. If the banker was a Mason and the borrower was a Mason, the banker had access to a powerful screening mechanism. He knew the borrower had sworn solemn oaths of integrity on the Bible. More importantly, he knew that if the borrower defaulted or acted dishonestly, he wouldn't just lose his business. He would be expelled from the lodge and socially ostracized by the entire local elite. In an opaque market where information is scarce, the secret society acts as a trust proxy. It fills the gap where institutions fail. The handshake was, quite literally, a credit check. The cronyism cost: large firms. However, for large, established, publicly traded companies, those on the official list of the London Stock Exchange, the effect reversed. Braggion found that large firms managed by Masons had lower profits and a lower Tobin's Q, a standard measure of market valuation defined as the market value of a firm divided by the replacement cost of its assets. Braggion suggests that in these large firms, the Masonic network mutated from a trust mechanism into a source of corruption or entrenchment. Managers might use the network to give contracts to brothers, rather than the best suppliers, cronyism. They might hire their Masonic friends as directors regardless of competence, or they might simply be too busy attending lodge meetings, organizing banquets, and memorizing rituals to focus on the boring business of running the company. The Old Boys Club tax. This suggests a fascinating economic law of secret societies. They are developmental tools. They are incredibly valuable for bootstrapping trust where none exists. Frontier America, early industrial Britain. But they become a liability in a mature, transparent market. When a company is established and transparent, it doesn't need a secret trust mechanism. In that context, the network becomes a parasite, extracting value through favors and exclusion. Freemasonry was the LinkedIn of the 19th century, but it came with a subscription fee. Eventual inefficiency. The psychology of the apron. We move now from the boardroom to the brain. One of the most common criticisms of Freemasonry is that it is silly. Why would a grown man, a judge, a general, a CEO, agree to be blindfolded, have a noose, a cable tow, placed around his neck, and recite archaic poetry while men in aprons watch? To the modern eye, it looks like cosplay. But evolutionary psychology suggests it is highly functional. We cross-reference this with studies on ritualized behavior from the Journal of Applied Sports Psychology and Organizational Behavior and Human Decision Processes. Precaution Theory and Anxiety Regulation. Research by Brooks et al., 2016, titled "Don't Stop Believing: Rituals Improve Performance by Decreasing Anxiety," provides a scientific framework for understanding the Masonic Lodge. In a series of experiments, Brooks asked participants to perform high-anxiety tasks, such as singing the song "Don't Stop Believin'" publicly in front of a critical audience, or solving difficult math problems under time pressure. One group was asked to perform a ritual beforehand, a rigid, repetitive sequence of meaningless gestures. For example, draw a picture of how you feel, sprinkle salt on it, count to 10, throw it away. The control group was told to just relax. The group that performed the ritual performed significantly better, singing more largely, solving more math problems, and reported lower subjective anxiety. Biometric data showed lower heart rate variability, indicating a calmer physiological state. Anxiety is essentially a response to uncertainty and a lack of control. A ritual is an act of pure, rigid control. By executing a precise, scripted series of movements, steps, handshakes, word-perfect recitations, the brain regains a sense of agency. The ritual bounds the anxiety. Apply this to the 18th and 19th centuries. Life was incredibly uncertain. Disease was rampant, war was constant, and economic ruin was one bad harvest away. The Masonic Lodge offered a safe space of absolute rigid order. The rituals were not just theater, they were cognitive regulation. The ritual. Every word must be perfect. Every step must be geometric. The hierarchy is clear. For a man living in a chaotic world, stepping into the lodge was a form of psychological grounding. The silliness of the apron and the ritual was a feature, not a bug. It forced the brain to disengage from the chaos of the outside world and enter a state of flow and order. Collective intimacy. Furthermore, a study of Israeli Freemasons titled "The Architecture of Collective Intimacy" introduces a crucial sociological concept. Sociologists often note that men struggle with face-to-face intimacy, sitting across a table discussing feelings. They prefer shoulder-to-shoulder intimacy, doing a task together. Masonic ritual is the ultimate shoulder-to-shoulder activity. It is a complex team sport. It requires memorization, coordination, and trust. It allows men to bond deeply without the awkwardness of emotional vulnerability. They are working on the ritual together. The decline of Freemasonry might be a contributing factor to the modern male loneliness epidemic. We have removed the structure that allowed men to be intimate with each other safely, leaving them with only face-to-face options that many find uncomfortable or solitary digital consumption. Historical forensics, the Mormon connection. One of the most controversial aspects of Masonic history is its link to Mormonism, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. John Dickie touches on this, but to truly understand it, we need to look at the raw timeline. In the 1840s, Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, was building a new city called Nauvoo in Illinois. He faced immense external persecution and internal dissent. He needed a way to bind his followers together with oaths of secrecy and absolute loyalty, something stronger than just church membership. The timeline, December 1841, 18. Latter-day Saint Masons organize a lodge in Nauvoo. March 15, 1842. Joseph Smith is initiated as an entered apprentice Mason. March 16, 1842. Just one day later, Smith is raised to the degree of Master Mason, a process that usually takes months or years. May 4, 1842. Just 7 weeks later, Joseph Smith gathers 9 of his closest followers, all of whom were Masons, in the upper room of his red brick store and introduces the endowment ceremony, the central ritual of Mormon temple worship. The endowment introduced by Smith bore a striking, undeniable resemblance to the Masonic rituals he had just learned. The ceremony involved secret handshakes, tokens, and gestures, signs, that were nearly identical to Masonic grips. In the original versions of both rituals, the initiates swore oaths under the penalty of having their throat slit or their heart torn out if they revealed the secrets. Both rituals involved a specific embrace known as the 5 points of fellowship: foot to foot, knee to knee, breast to breast, hand to back, cheek to cheek / mouth to ear. Critics argue this proves Smith was a fraud who simply plagiarized the Masonic ritual. Apologists within the church argue that Smith believed Freemasonry was a corrupted version of the ancient priesthood from Solomon's temple, and that he was restoring it to its true divine form. From a distilled perspective, we look at the function. Joseph Smith was a genius of social organization. He recognized that the Masonic structure, the oaths, the secrecy, the ritual progression, was an incredibly powerful tool for creating social cohesion, as Braggion proved. Smith baptized the ritual. He took the Masonic form, which was secular and fraternal, and filled it with theological content: salvation, eternal marriage, exaltation. It worked. The endowment created a nucleus of hyper-loyal, cohesive leadership that allowed the Mormon Church to survive the murder of Smith, the migration to Utah, and decades of persecution. Just as Freemasonry was the operating system of the British Empire, the Masonic-derived temple ritual became the operating system of the Mormon state in Utah. This is not to debunk the faith, but to highlight how powerful the mechanism of Freemasonry was. It was so effective that it was adopted and adapted by 2 of the most successful social movements of the 19th century: the Mormon Church for religion and the Sicilian Mafia for crime. Both recognized that oaths, rituals, and secrecy are the building blocks of ultra-resilient communities. The distillate. We have distilled the history, the economics, and the psychology. What is the residue? What can we take away for our own lives in the 21st century? The Freemasons might be declining, but the human needs they satisfied, trust, belonging, and ritual, are more acute than ever. Here is how to apply the wisdom of the craft without wearing an apron. 1. The third place is essential. Rebuild your lodge. Sociologist Ray Oldenburg coined the term third place to describe a social surrounding separate from the 2 usual social environments of home, first place, and the workplace, second place. The lodge was the ultimate third place. Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone shows that the decline of these spaces correlates directly with rising loneliness, polarization, and social poverty. We have replaced the lodge with the infinite, shallow connectivity of the internet. You need a lodge. It doesn't have to be Freemasonry. It could be a run club, a makerspace, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym, or a D&D group. But it must have 2 Masonic characteristics. Regularity. It must meet at a set time, for example, every Tuesday at 7 p.m. This removes the friction of scheduling and makes it a habit rather than an event. Membership. It must have a boundary. You must belong to it. This creates the psychological safety necessary for bridging social capital, bonding with people you wouldn't otherwise meet. 2. Rituals are cognitive hacks. Use pre-performance routines. We scoff at magical thinking, but the science from Brooks et al. Is clear. Rituals work to lower anxiety and improve performance. You don't need a sword and a blindfold. You need a pre-performance routine. Create a micro-ritual for your high-pressure moments, public speaking, trading, difficult conversations. It shouldn't be just taking a deep breath. It should be rigid and specific. Tap the table twice, straighten your watch, take 3 deep breaths, say, "Let's go." This is not magic, it is interference theory. You are occupying your working memory with the ritual so that anxiety cannot hijack it. You are stepping into your own personal lodge of control. 3. Constructive secrecy, the private network. Freemasonry taught us the power of a private society. In an age of radical transparency, social media, everything is performative. Every dinner is an Instagram post. Every opinion is a tweet. Trust is built in the dark. You cannot have honest, exploratory, risky conversations if you are worried about being cancelled or quoted out of context. The Enlightenment was fueled by the privacy of the lodge. Cultivate a Chatham House rule circle. Gather a group of friends or colleagues for a regular dinner where the explicit rule is, what is said here stays here. This isn't about hiding bad behavior, it's about creating psychological safety. It allows for the rough draft of ideas. It allows you to be speculative Masons, speculating on ideas without fear of retribution. So, to distill it all down, Freemasonry wasn't a conspiracy to run the world. It was a social technology invented in 1717 to help men trust each other in an untrustworthy world. It succeeded so well that it built the British Empire and the American Republic, but it failed to update its software for the 20th century. It teaches us that rituals reduce anxiety, secrecy builds trust, and that we all need a place to go that isn't work or home. If you want to read Fabio Braggion's fascinating paper on Victorian firms, or dive into the studies on ritual psychology, check the show notes. We've linked all the papers there. If you enjoyed this distillation, subscribe, like, hit the bell icon on YouTube and Spotify so you don't miss our next episode.